All right, guys, well, welcome back to my YouTube channel. As you guys know, all across the country, it is super hot out there. Supposedly, it's the highest summer on record. Um, but I felt kind of inspired just because of the temperature to do a video on cooling systems and how to keep these Fox bodies cool in the summertime. Over the years, I've kind of devised a system that really works for pretty much most any pretty decent horsepower application out there. It came with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of money shed out just to try to figure out, and as far as parts were concerned, what would work. And I think I have it narrowed down. The last several years, I don't have any issues. And so what I want to do is go over what I use for my cooling systems, so that way you guys can maybe go down the same track if you're having cooling system issues in the summertime, and make your Fox body hobby a little more enjoyable in the summertime. So let's get to it. What I want to do is go over the basics of a Fox body cooling system as quick as I can. I'm sure you guys already know this, but for the newcomers out there, let's pretend your engine's cold, just like this one is right here. When you start it up, all the coolant that is sitting in the block circulates within itself via the water neck. There's a bypass hose from the water pump, and the thermostat remains in the closed position. And all the thermostat is basically a thermostatic valve that will open once the coolant on the engine side opens to the preset temperature of the thermostat. The spring will collapse, and the system pressure will allow the coolant to flow out through the water neck to the radiator. So when the engine is cold, as it's building heat, the coolant is only circulating within itself. Nothing is flowing to the radiator because the thermostat blocks the flow. But until that coolant is circulating within the block, starts building heat enough to crack the thermostat open, now the coolant that was in your radiator now flows into the block, and the hot coolant flows into the radiator. When the coolant flows into the block, the thermostat now senses the cold coolant, and the spring expands and it shuts the valve, for all intents and purposes, the thermostat, and the cycle repeats itself over and over. Basics of a cooling system. So through all this, what I found out when you start making really good power with these cars is the engines will build more heat faster than the radiators can cool down. So the cycle still continues. However, if it continues in that way, then eventually you start seeing your needle start creeping up no matter how much airflow you have, because if your radiator and fan setup cannot cool down the hot coolant that entered the radiator faster than the engine coolant can raise its temp, then you just have well, bad metaphor, but a snowball effect in the opposite way of a snowball. So what I've come up with to make these cars run cool is, number one, I do not run a thermostat. I know that's a very questionable topic for a lot of you out there. It really shouldn't be, because what I'm about to tell you is probably gonna, if you have the idea that running no thermostat is a bad idea, if you wait just a little bit, I'm going to tell you what actually compensates for not running a mechanical thermostat in the water neck. I don't run a thermostat, so the coolant is constantly flowing. Now, if you do decide to run no thermostat, what I do is your actual 90-degree water neck that comes off your intake, there's going to be a bypass hose that goes to your water pump. Normally, I take that nipple, I can, either I mill it off and I drill and tap it for a 1/2-inch national pipe thread, plug it off. So that way 100% of the coolant leaves through the water neck and not about 70% and 30% going through the bypass hose and recirculating. So I want all the coolant to leave the block to go to the radiator. So that's the first thing I do, is I don't run a thermostat. The second thing I do, which is probably one of the most critical parts, is the radiator itself. The radiator that I use is a Griffin Dominator series. It's part number 00165. It is kind of a generic Ford. I think it's a 31 inch by 19 inch radiator. I believe it has a 3-inch wide core with twin 1.5-inch radiator tubes. Guys, this is the radiator to use. The first 93 GT that I had that I was telling you about that had a 393 stroker, all my cooling problems went away when I went to that radiator. Gunner, the hatchback with a 414 cubic inch, same cooling system, same radiator, no thermostat, same fans, which I will go over here in just a second, same radiator. And obviously this car Ruby, which is, as stated earlier, makes pretty good power, a Dart 363 with a Novi. This car stays it gets no hotter than 180 degrees the way I have it set in 90 plus degree weather in the summer in Georgia. Stop and go traffic, doesn't matter. So number one, I don't run a thermostat. Number two, I get the Griffin Dominator radiator. One of the caveats of this radiator is that it doesn't have any mounting points to hold the radiator in place, nor does it have any mounting points for a radiator fan. So you have to get creative with these radiators if you're going to use them. What I've been very, very successful with is running to the part store that typically sells home goods that has an orange logo, if you know what I mean. And they have a section that has bar stock, and I usually get a 90-degree aluminum bar stock. And what I do is I usually get these Steeda hold downs, but you can get any generic hold down. And when I place the radiator in to mock it up, I want the back side of the 90 of this aluminum to be on the inside part of this radiator hold down, so that way it holds the radiator from going towards the engine. And then what I do is I lightly scuff the top of the radiator where that bar stock will be, perfectly measured, to get your fitment right. And I use a high performance 2-part epoxy to bind it together, and that shouldn't worry you guys. A lot of our high-end race cars that I've worked on over the years, a lot of aeronautic stuff, a lot of it has aluminum bonded with 2-part epoxy, so there's nothing wrong there. Also, same thing with the radiator tabs. It's not the best. I mean, it's not the prettiest, I'd say, but it gets the job done. When they don't give you any kind of bracketry hold down, you just have to get creative. And what those clips are holding, if I can come around here, excuse me, is a OEM Ford Motorcraft 99 to 05 contour fan setup, dual contour fan setup. So I, for one, like the factory Motorcraft fans because they have the Bosch Siemens electric motors. Some of them are made in Canada, some of them are made in Germany. The power of the motors for those electric motors are a lot more powerful than an aftermarket Dorman, let's say, replacement. So you can find these at the junkyard. I was luckily, I was able to find a couple of these Motorcraft radiators brand new in the box a few years ago from an online vendor. So I bought a couple of them. So I have a few spares. But also, if the fan motors go out, I also have brand new, I don't know if they make them anymore, but I think a guy was selling them on a forum. But he had the actual Bosch Siemens electric motors that bolt into these, the fan shroud with the blades, just the motors themselves. He had I think 5 or 6 of them, brand new in the boxes, and I just cleared them out. I just bought all of them. I have them stacked up. So they're in storage. So those are the fans I use. Factory Ford Motorcraft contour dual fan setup. And of course, with homemade brackets, just some 90s and a brake with some aluminum stock. So it holds it. But one of the most important pieces of this cooling system, and I don't know if you guys can see it. I'm going to try and get in here. It's a little dark, but mounted on the fan shroud is my fan controller. Company called Delta Current Control, and they are still in business, and they make, I for one think they're the best, highest quality, longest lasting fan controllers on the market. And they're available in a few different amperage ratings. But what sets the Delta Current controllers apart from anything else, from what I've seen, and maybe there's some other products out there that are similar, but the Delta Current controller is what's called a pulse width modulator. So what it does is it actually has a temperature sender that goes in the fins of the radiator. You know, just sticks in the fins, you wedge it in there, and it's an electronic sensor. It's a thermocouple that goes back to the unit. And the unit itself has a potentiometer knob that you use with a jeweler's flat blade screwdriver. And I'm going to show it to you later. Matter of fact, hang tight, let me go get it. But as I was talking about before, here's the Delta Current Control fan controller that I use. Again, it's available from deltacurrentcontrol.com. When you go to the website, once you enter the website, I believe there's two links. One is for a constant temperature controller site within its own homepage. That's the one you want to go to, and you'll see a list of these depending on the amperage rating that you need. Typically for us Fox Body guys, if you're running like a twin fan setup, like a Contour, or even a single Mark 8 or something like that, you really only need the 45 amp setup or the 50 amp setup, which is what this one is. I think the next one up is a 75 amp, but that's really kind of overkill. I think you'd be safe with the 75 amp, but I always run I think this is the FK45. I'm not sure if this is still available. I think he may have made something to replace it, but this is the equivalent of the entry-level fan controller, and I've run 3 of these so far over a, let's say, a 15-year span. Haven't had a problem yet. But this is what sets these cooling systems apart, guys, is with this fan controller, as you can see, you have an input, which is your positive main hot lead from your battery. Fused, of course, it comes with a fusible link. GND for ground, and an output which parallels out if you have twin fans or singles out for one fan. But either way, that's your output to your fan. There's a thermocouple that plugs in here. You can see there's a series of spades that are on this unit, and here's the potentiometer that you use, that you turn with a jeweler screwdriver. But it comes preset for 180 degree maintenance temperature. This controller, no thermostat, the Dominator radiator, and Contour fans, OEM, to get these cars to cool in stop and go traffic. That's the secret. That's my secret. It works, guys. So if you're really struggling with your Fox Body, if it's not cooling, it's going to be the route to go. Now, it's going to, of course, you know, unfortunately, it's going to cost you some coin, but believe it or not, it's going to relieve you of a lot of stress, not being able to drive, or if it's overheating or what have you, you know, and make your hobby more enjoyable. So I just wanted to give you guys a rundown of my cooling systems. And the only reason I bring this up is because I was talking to a buddy, you know who you are out there, who recently told me that their car was having issues overheating, and it's a very similar setup to this. I think his is a 347 supercharged with a Vortec, and I'm not sure what cooling system he has, but again, guys, I don't have any issues out of this setup in 95 degree weather, stop go, no matter what. 180 degrees is all I see. Actually, it struggles to get up to 180 degrees, but normally in 95 degree weather in the summer, you know, I hover around 175, 176 all day long. Now, There, you know, just like everything else in life, there is a balance to this setup, and I almost forgot, but I do want to be completely honest with you guys. If you do run this type of a cooling system, no thermostat, Dominator fan, or, you know, the Dominator radiator, OEM fan, and the controller, once you get it set in the summer heat to where you want, if you live in an area that gets cold in the winter times and you want to take your cars out, your car will run cold in the winter time. Now, how cold, you might ask? Like here in North Georgia, you know, if it gets down to about 30 degrees here, and I take this car out, along with even the same thing with Gunner with the, you know, with the 414 cubic inch, if I take those cars out when it's about 30 degrees outside, or even in the 20s, if it's super cold, it does take a while from first start to build heat, which you would expect. But even as you drive, from what I've seen, the hottest, I mean, the absolute hottest I'll get in the wintertime in that kind of a temperature is maybe 160 degrees, maybe. And that's stop and go. So they are going to run cooler in the wintertime, but they're not going to be so cold that they're undrivable. So that is a little bit of the downfall. Will your heat work? Absolutely. It just won't blow as hot if it were, you know, if the coolant temp was, you know, at the normal 180 or 200 degrees, but you will still have heat. It'll just run a little cooler than normal. But to me, as long as these Fox bodies can run like a bat out of you-know-what in the summertime and run cool enough to not overheat where you still make really good power, that's top priority for me. Wintertime is just kind of, you know, a give and take. I just let it run a little cooler, and that's the story of my life. So anyway, I just wanted to show you guys the cooling systems that I use, and hopefully I've helped a lot of y'all out there who have pretty good horsepower cars. Even, you know, even the more entry-level setups can definitely use this setup. However, like if you're running like an all-motor 347, I'd say you're probably pretty good with like a stock style aluminum radiator, probably 160 degree thermostat. Now, you still use the contour fans and some sort of a fan controller, but I don't believe you would probably need to go to a Dominator series fan. You know, when you start going into like your 351s and higher compression, pretty much a 351, strokers, anything with a supercharger, stuff like that, I would definitely recommend the Dominator series. Now, one of the benefits with the way the cooling systems work is you can always benefit from a bigger radiator just because it has a bigger cooling capacity. It doesn't mean that just because you use a bigger radiator and don't generate enough heat from your engine that it's going to run cooler. What's going to happen is with those setups, I would probably run a thermostat like, you know, like let's say an all-motor 347. If you're going to get one of these bigger radiators, because they're about the same price, definitely run a thermostat with like a 160, 170, and then see what it does and modulate your temperature with your fan controller to fine-tune it. And that way, you already have the bigger radiator. You can always grow. So if you decide to sell that all-motor 347 or 331 and you decide to go, you know, big inch Windsor, or you want to put a blower on or something like that, you're already set up. So that's pretty much the way to go. Hey guys, when I was recording that video back there, one thing I forgot to mention that was pretty critical when it comes to the Delta control module is what sets it apart is what you'll notice as the temperature thermocouple reaches the set point that you guys set it to. Instead of like a relay that shocks the electrical system with 70 amps worth of load, let's say, depending on whatever load your fans draw, what it'll do is it'll slowly ramp up the amperage going to the fans. So you'll start to see them slowly speed up, and then they maintain the speed using the pulse width modulation. And then same thing when the coolant cools down enough to where it doesn't need as much fan speed, your fan speeds will slowly decrease. So that's why I prefer them. You don't have a shock load on the electrical system. very hard on the alternator, very hard on everything. So I highly recommend them, guys, and just wanted to touch on that. And again, thanks for watching.